Imagine being trapped in your own home with a partner, only to realize they've been using the isolation to build a separate life with someone else. In March 2020, that scenario became my reality. Like most of the world, we were confined to a small apartment, forced into a 24/7 proximity that we weren't prepared for. The burden of survival was lopsided. I covered 70% of the rent and managed every household detail, from tracking down supplies to cooking every meal, while the world outside grew increasingly uncertain. While I worked to keep us afloat, he checked out. He would spend hours in the bathroom with the door locked, escaping into YouTube reviews of a matte black Porsche 911, obsessing over leather specs and engine sounds. He was using that fantasy of a high-end future to ignore our present situation. I wasn't his partner in his eyes. I was a temporary fixture holding his life together until he could find something better. That illusion of loyalty dissolved on a Tuesday evening. He left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter when he stepped out, and a message from a coworker named Chloe appeared on the screen. They were planning a future for whenever the world reopened. It was a sharp contrast. I was sanitizing groceries and managing our dwindling savings, while he was mapping out an exit strategy. When he returned and I confronted him, there was no apology or attempt to explain. He didn't even seem surprised that he'd been caught. He told me the lockdown had made him realize he felt stifled. His final justification was that he needed someone on his level, someone, as he put it, who was ambitious enough to keep up with him. By the end of the week, he was gone, leaving me to handle a lease I couldn't afford in the middle of a global shutdown. It forces a grim question. How do you respond when you've been abandoned and insulted at your absolute lowest point? The first month was a blur of physical exhaustion. I spent most days as a ghost in my own home, drained by the weight of the isolation and the betrayal. After the first few weeks, I spent a morning looking at my reflection, exhausted and defeated. His insult about my lack of ambition didn't just hurt anymore. It became the only thing I could focus on. I decided that his assessment would be the last thing he was ever right about. I began with a period of total silence. No public venting, no social media updates, and zero contact. I cut off the supply of information he had about my life. I took the anger I was feeling and treated it as a raw resource. I started an e-commerce business for my living room floor, funneling every spare second into building something of my own. This wasn't about finding a distraction. It was about realizing that true ambition doesn't need an audience. It only needs a direction for the pain to go. My schedule shifted to 18-hour days. I taught myself supply chain logistics, brand design, and digital marketing, turning my apartment into a makeshift headquarters. Looking at this comparison, the difference is clear. He spent his time in passive ambition, wishing for a car and scrolling through videos. I was engaged in active ambition, studying, building, and executing a plan. To maintain that pace, I had to fix my physical state. I replaced junk food with a strict diet and started a daily home workout routine to manage the stress of the workload. As my physical health improved, my business started to reflect that discipline. Sales began to climb, and for the first time in a year, my confidence wasn't tied to someone else's opinion of me. Recovery from trauma requires rebuilding the mind and the body at the same time. You have to create a foundation that a passive dreamer could never hope to replicate. 18 months later, the results were visible. The business was generating 6-figure months, and I moved into a high-rise downtown, leaving that old apartment behind. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that he was still in the same dead-end job, miserable with Chloe, and blaming the economy for his lack of progress. When the news of my success reached him, he sent a text. He told me he was proud of me and suggested we meet for coffee to catch up. I didn't feel the need to reply or demand an apology for how he left. I deleted the message and moved on with my morning. You know you've recovered when you no longer need the person who hurt you to acknowledge your growth. Their perspective simply stops mattering. The final move was a practical business decision. My accountant recommended a major asset purchase for tax purposes, and I knew exactly what fit the criteria. I walked into a dealership and paid cash for a matte black Porsche 911 Carrera. It was the exact model he used to cry about while I was paying his rent. A few weeks later, I was stopped at a light in the financial district. I saw him on the crosswalk, holding a cheap coffee, staring at the car with his jaw dropped. He was looking at his dream, not realizing who was driving it. I rolled down the window just enough for our eyes to meet. I didn't smile, and I didn't wave. When the light turned green, I just drove away. Using your pain to elevate your own reality is the only response that matters. When you outgrow the version of yourself that needed their approval, they become nothing more than a speck in your rearview mirror.